The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CIWM webinars. My name is Claire Paul. I'm the Professional Development Manager here at CIWM, and I'm going to be pressing the buttons today just to make sure this webinar works smoothly. We've only just sort of started the broadcast, so we'll just give it another short while, just 30 seconds or so, just to see if we're getting anybody else logging in. So far we've got 38 people on the line, which is really good. I'll go through some housekeeping in a moment, but just give people a chance to log in. Okay, so welcome to the Environment Agency's Waste Sector Strategic Review of Charging webinar. As I said, my name is Claire Paul. I am the Professional Development Manager here at CIWM, and will be pressing the buttons to make sure the webinar works smoothly. So fingers crossed, it will be amazingly brilliant. A little bit of housekeeping before we start, if I may. Okay, so anybody listening into this webinar, your microphones are muted, so we won't be able to hear what you say, but you can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. So to ask a question of the speakers, you can type them into your question box. You will find the question box at the bottom of your dashboard, possibly on the right-hand side of your screen. Your questions are not public, so don't panic. They will only be seen by myself and our two colleagues from the Environment Agency who will be answering them for you. We will try and get through as many questions as time permits. If at any time you lose your webinar dashboard at any point, there is a small orange arrow at the top corner of the dashboard that will show and hide it when clicked. If you have lost your webinar screen altogether, you should see a blue flower on your taskbar at the bottom of your monitor. Click on that and it will reappear. Okay, I need to let you know that the session is being recorded, and a link to the audio and visuals will be shared with you via email within the next 24 hours. I think it's scheduled to come to you tomorrow. You will therefore be able to revisit a recording of the video, of the slides, as well as hear the presentation at your leisure. So don't worry about taking notes. You will be able to view it back sometime after tomorrow. We will answer some of your questions partway through, and then we'll move on, do more at the end. This will give you a chance to have a think about what questions you want to ask. Type them in the question box as you think of them. Don't save them up to the end, because you might be on the bottom of a very long list, and we want to get through your questions. So please submit your typed questions throughout rather than waiting to the end, and we'll get through as many as we can. Throughout the webinar, there'll be a couple of opportunities to give your opinions on questions, and these will be in the form of multiple choice polls. When a question comes up on the screen, you will have around about 30-40 seconds to tick the answer. You only need to tick one answer and then click submit, and we will show you the results. After the webinar, a very brief pop-up survey will appear on your screen as you log out. It will only take a couple of minutes. There's only 5 questions. And it really is important to us to let us know what you think about the webinar, about webinars in general, and how you might think we can use them. So without further delay, I'm going to hand over to your speakers today. The main speaker is going to be Paul Fernee, who's a senior advisor with the Environment Agency. And also joining us is Alan Owers, who's going to be your question master for today. Alan is also a senior advisor with the Environment Agency, specialising in metal recycling. So, Paul, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Claire. Welcome. See if the technology works. Oh, it's gone already.
Okay, do you want to try again, Paul?
Okay, right. I'm just trying the I can't seem to advance the slide. I'll give it one more go. No, I lost it again.
Okay, we'll try something else.
I'm happy for you to advance the slides if that's easier.
Okay, just one more go before we give up and try something else.
I can't see the presentation. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, right. Am I going to rely on you then, Claire, to advance the slides?
Yeah, we'll give it a go.
Okay then. Let's see what we can do then. Okay, that's Paul. I'm Paul Fernee. I'm a senior advisor in the Environment and Business Waste Regulation team, and I've been helping to coordinate the strategic review of charges for the waste treatment sector and working very closely with my colleagues in the landfill sector. Thank you, Claire. So where we are, we've done a lot of pre-consultation so far with various trade associations in order to try and get people to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. We had thought that the consultation would have started by now, and I could have shared with you a different presentation, but it's not quite got through, so we're working on the pre-consultation version today, so apologies with that. So we've tried to interact with all the main trade associations and stakeholders. We've been along to WAMITAB assessor events at three events around the country, and again we're talking to you on this webinar today. We are hoping that the consultation does launch either at the end of this week or next week, and it will then be open till sort of early January. It will close to sort of mid-January, I guess, depending on when exactly it starts. So it's really important that you have a chance to give your opinions as part of that consultation, and the purpose of today's webinar is to hopefully get you up to speed so you can make some informed consultation comments. Thank you. So we're going to cover a few topics or areas as part of this presentation. We're going to do a very, very quick overview about new time and materials charges. We're going to look at permit application, modification, variation charges as well, and then we're going to go on to the bit that Alan and I have been working on about expected performance, and that subsistence charge. That's the annual charge that gets levied. And then we'll very, very quickly touch on poor performance just to reinforce the message there is no change there. Thank you. So there is a generic presentation, a SROC presentation that can be made available. We're not keen on this presentation being circulated far and wide because it is out of date, and you will see something different when the consultation starts. But basically, the generic slides give an indication of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. There are the baseline charges we think that apply to sort of all activities or all activities within the sector. And then there's the supplementary charges, things that don't apply to everybody, and we were going to try and levy those separately. And there's some examples on the screen where we think we will apply the supplementary charges and the routine charges. So normal operation for normal applications would be seen as routine. Your annual subsistence charge would be routine if you were a good performer. Where things then change, if for unusual performance, will be things like poor performance, where there's problems or incidents, and also it can be applied to things like novel technologies such as hydraulic fracturing, things like that. Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Okay. Again, this is about the permitting life cycle. The routine parts of the permit life cycle are built into the charges. So permit maintenance, updates, routine review. We've got a small component in the annual charge for those sorts of things. But where the unusual happens, things that don't happen every year, such as variation and transfers, there are the supplementary charges that will be applied there. Thank you. So we're going to pop over time and materials. This is something the agency is going to be pushing a lot more. It's so that we don't have to spread the costs across everyone. We only focus them on the sites or the operators that are generating that burden for us, basically, and then getting remunerated for that work. So the one that I wanted to share with you today, there's various rates. We're going to focus on definition of waste. There's a definition of waste team, and as part and parcel of this consultation, we'll be asking people whether or not they think we should be providing definition of waste services and charging for them. So on the previous slide, there were some various rates. The definition of waste rate is shown in the wrong place on that slide. It should really be at the specialist rate. Thanks, Claire. But you'll see there's other rates. There's standard rates for subsistence time and materials. There's an enhanced rate for application time and materials. If we're assessing things like improvement plan submissions and things like that, they are likely to come in at the enhanced rate. And definition of waste should be up there in the specialist rate. And then you've got the highest charges with COMA and RSR nuclear. Thank you. So what we're trying to get across to people is, if people want us to assess their end of waste submissions, we need to be funded for it. At the moment, it sort of gets funded from everyone. That includes people's subsistence fee, and we don't think that's fair. It should be only for the people that are putting those applications in. So what we're looking at is an hourly fee of £125 for doing that, but we think it takes about 6 hours to do a basic assessment of a definition of waste or an end of waste application. So we think as a minimum it's going to be 6 hours at 750, 6 hours at £125, which would add up to £750. And the numbers along the top gave you the sort of average numbers of applications that we were having to look at per year, and that was really unfunded work, and of course that means that we then have to pull resources from other funded work. Thank you, Claire. So we're proposing changes to the application charges, and this is being prepared by the National Permitting Service, so it's not something I've been directly involved in, but I'm familiar with, and I'd like to run some of these changes past yourselves as well. So along the same lines as only charging people for the work that's required and not spreading those charges across everybody, the new charge has been based on how long it takes to produce the permit, and it includes the input from everybody that's part of that process. So they've looked at a number of recent permit applications and looked at the time it's taken to do those in order to generate these new charges. So they want you to have a clear line of sight between service and charge, and I think it's a bit buzzwordy that, but it means that you should be able to see what you're paying for. We think the new approach retains a link between risk and applications that need extra assessment. So you'll see bigger charges around those extra bits of work. There's generally flat fees, so we say up front what the charge is rather than just doing it on a time and materials throughout. But to put it in some sort of perspective, there's 160 different application categories across waste, installations and water quality. So waste is only one small part of this overall strategic review of charging, though it's of course the most important to Alan and myself. Thank you. So from an application point of view, the permitting team have looked at it from a sector-specific approach, so making sure that the charges are appropriate to each sector. They've looked at component charges, extra things that cost more time to do and therefore more resource, making sure that they're only built into the baseline charge when it applies to everyone, and if there are things that only apply to a fewer number of applicants, there's a separate charge for that, so the cost isn't spread across everybody. So things that we'll see highlighted there are noise assessment plans, fire prevention plans, those sorts of things like that. The new approach again is the variation surrender charges are based on a percentage of the new charge, again to make things easier to understand, and there's flat fees for transfers and the option for what they call a bulk transfer discount, and that's where if a company is transferring say 10 permits, a lot of that work is duplicated, so we can reduce charges there. The first thing to really flag up here is to do with the pre-application charges. At the moment, there's been a lot of mixed messages about pre-application charges, and that you can have 15 hours free application, a pre-application for bespoke, and I think it's something like 3.5 or less for standard rules. But nothing is free. It all has to be paid for. So if we were to build that level of pre-application into the new charges, that would be something that there'd be automatically 15 hours of extra charges there, which you might not actually want. So we're reviewing that approach, and we'll be interested in your views as part of the consultation there. One of the problems we have is with poor applications, and we're having to return them. But we think in order to promote better applications, we need to actually charge for that work that we have undertaken before we've returned it. So we think that's going to be about 20% of the fee, or £1,500. And again, to encourage people to put good applications in at the beginning, we're introducing flat fees for additional information. And if somebody decides they've changed their mind or want to add extra things in halfway through the determination process, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that we do have to charge for, because we have to redo some work. Looking at a charge of about £1,900 for that. We are looking at levying time and materials charges for extra pre-application work that we require to do for sites of high public interest. That's the SHIPE acronym. Some novel technologies take lots and lots of effort to work out whether they're safe and they're permittable. So we'll have to charge extra for those activities. At the moment, those are effectively funded from across the board. But where we charge for each activity on a site, we can reduce processing times, but pass on savings to customers. And again, there'll be some examples that explain that a little bit better a bit later on. So we talked about additional component charges, things that shouldn't apply to everyone. If they do apply to everybody, they are of course built into the baseline charge. But this is a very old slide. The numbers may well have changed as up to the consultation version, but it gives a broad overview of what is it we're looking to charge extra. So we're looking, around £800 for an extra sensitive location assessment. Bioaerosol risk assessments, obviously important for the biowaste sector, about £1,200 for those. Odour management plans, again, between £1,500 and £1,200 there. Fire prevention plans, £1,200, etc. And noise management plans. So if you're required to do one of these plans as part of your application, because it's potentially noisy activity or an odorous activity, or is likely to emit bioaerosols, or has a fire risk, you will accrue these extra component charges as part of the application fee. Thank you. So what we're looking at is flat fees for permit transfer. You'll see that the flat fee is around £2,500. We talked about bulk transfers earlier on. Well, if you were doing a number of permits, the first permit would cost £2,500, and then subsequent permits could be done at about £300 as well. So we recognise there's efficiencies there, and we hope to pass those efficiencies on to operators. Again, a transfer fee for landfill obviously is a lot more complicated. The work there is bigger with financial provision, etc. So you'll see a much bigger fee there and a smaller fee there for intensive farming. Thank you. So our proposal for variations is to do it on a percentage basis. So a substantial variation is 90% of the bespoke fee. These hopefully will be defined clearly in the consultation. If you believe that's not the case when the consultation is being undertaken, you must make those comments known. So a normal variation is 50% of the application fee, and a minor variation 30% of the application fee. An admin variation is free, but we're being very clear that that really is limited to something like a change of address for a registered company. Previously, there's been you can have a dozen EWC codes added to a permit every year for free. That's long gone, so bear that in mind. Surrender will be 60% of the application fee, and low risk surrender will be where potentially sites haven't operated. That will be 20% of the application fee. So thank you very much. Right, so for multi-regime, multi-activity applications, that could be where a site's doing a number of different activities, but it's one permit application. the permitting team have decided that they will charge 100% of the application charge for what they call the primary activity. That's the main thing that's being undertaken. However, other activities will be charged a percentage of the application fee. So 50% will be charged for a new bespoke secondary activity. So you can have a treatment activity with an effluent treatment activity, and the effluent treatment will be the secondary activity. And then 10% for bespoke or repeat activities. So where you're doing multiples of the same thing, then the subsequent activities will be charged at 10%. And then there's the complication in waste that if you're doing a treatment process, you'll probably be doing storage before you do the treatment. So we recognise that, and that's a 10% charge for what we call incidental storage. Thank you. So the objectives of these application proposals is to ensure that we've got the right resource for the work involved, and we get many complaints about the time it takes to process applications. We're hoping this is part of the response to remedy that. There's going to be a clear line of sight between the permitting activity that's undertaken and the charges that we levy. We want an increased application of pre-application advice, which will result in better quality applications. So the application time that an applicant puts in is less, and the amount of determination time we put in is less, and that will help us keep the charges low. We'll only, if you're doing a variation, will only be charged for the activity or the part of the permit that's being varied, which is slightly different to OPRA. We're introducing the discounts for bulk transfers. We intend to retain part of the fee for poor applications to promote better applications. And we're going to put more scrutiny into looking at poor performers in the waste sector as well. And that's some links in a little bit to Waste Crime Consultation 2, which we think is due next month. Thank you. So here are the numbers. They're not the numbers. Make it quite clear. These are some of the numbers we were using when we were generating the new fees. They have changed since then, but they're still not too far away. And rather than leave it hanging, I think it's better to give you a rough indication. So if you're looking at something like a standard rules permit, 2015 number 4, but that's a household commercial and industrial waste transfer station. The current charge was a fixed fee of £1,600. We recognise now that it requires a fire prevention plan assessment, so that fee has gone up to £3,900. The transfer costs for the permit have gone up from £960 to £2,500. Surrender has gone down. That was originally £3,500. That'll be just over £2,300. Thank you. So again, for a metal recycling site, for a bespoke permit, we think that the current fee is about £1,100. That will go up again to nearly £4,000 due to the extra work required from a fire prevention plan. Transfers again, same order of magnitude. You're going up from £900 to £2,500. Of course, if you're transferring more than one permit, the second permit and subsequent permits will be a lot cheaper. And again, surrender is going to be a lot cheaper under the new proposal. Thank you. So that's been looking at waste operations, looking at what was currently a waste installation activity, and we've just picked up on a fictitious waste oil treatment plant. I mean, the headline figures there is the current application charge is about £12,000. The new charge is going to be £24,500, which is the difference of £12,000. I'm sure you recognise the maths. The box on the left-hand side of the screen indicates the sort of complexity approach that we currently take for what were listed activities. They're EPR Schedule 1 references. And what that looks like now on the right-hand side is we talked about 100% charge for the main activity, which is the treatment of waste oil. That would be £16,000. The storage of waste oil is obviously a precursor to it being treated, so we would charge that at 10% of what would normally be a standalone storage charge, which would go down to £1,300. And then if you were operating an effluent treatment plant, biological treatment plant, we would only charge 50% of that. So again, your views on this need to be made clear in the consultation response. Thank you.
Okay, so we now have a question for the audience. So I'm just going to select the first question, and you should see that on your screen. The question is, do you think this proposed way of calculating application fees using add-ons for the additional components is better? And so your choices are yes, definitely, yes, possibly, no, it's unfair, or no, it's too complicated. So basically, I'm not really letting you sit on the fence on this one. So if you click your answer, press submit, we'll just give you another few seconds so that as many people as possible can vote, and then I'll show everybody the answers, the collective response. So we've got about 77% of people have voted at the moment. Possibly a few people still thinking. Okay, so we're doing pretty good. Got 88%. See if it goes up, and then I'll close the poll. Okay, so I'll close the poll, and the results should be on your screen. So what have we got? The biggest answer is 67% is yes, possibly. So I don't know, maybe that's when they see more detail, they'll be able to make a more definitive answer to that. 16% says it's unfair. And a few saying it's too complicated, and some saying, yeah, absolutely right. So I don't know whether, Paul, you've got any comments on that or not, or we can move on to questions from the audience.
Thank you for participating and thanks for the feedback. Have a good look at the consultation document when it comes out and make your views known there as well. It'd be appreciated.
Okay, so questions for the presenters. So this is over to you, Alan.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Thanks everybody who submitted questions. There's been quite a few coming in. Some of them have a common theme, so apologies if I don't actually respond to your specific one, but hopefully you'll get an answer from a related question. Also, some of them are not actually questions, they're more matters of opinion and comments, and that's absolutely great, but what I would urge you to do with those is to include those in your consultation responses. That's the place to express those opinions. So I won't be raising those. Okay, so I'll try and flip through these fairly swiftly. We'll get through as many as we can. And Claire, if because of time we need to stop, just shout and we can move on. So the first one was a question about, are these charges applicable to Scotland? Very simple answer to that is no. This relates to England only. There was a question here that perhaps Paul is going to pick up on more in the next section. So really it's about subsistence fees and suggesting that for Band A, can they be reduced to 80%? And I think Paul will be picking up on what reductions will be applicable for Band A performers in the next session. So we can leave that one for then. A question here about, will we see an improvement in service from our National Permitting Service as a result of the charges being implemented? Whereas I think Paul touched on the charges, and that there are some significant increases for application fees are based very much on the time and resource and effort that our National Permitting Service put into determining applications. So where there is a big increase or any increase, it follows that they're not getting sufficient funding to do that at the moment. So yes, that's obviously one of the reasons for doing this, and we would hope that any statutory standards and standards in guidance will be met as a result of this. There's a question about supplementary charges for complaints visits, and again, I'll leave that one because again, that's more subsistence related, which Paul will be coming on to. There's a question here about the definition of waste submissions. Is the £750 an application fee plus £125 per hour to determine on top of this? The answer to that is yes. That is the case. There's a question, another one about definition waste. Will there be a separate definition waste application team, or will they be sent through MPS? I'm not sure that the mechanics of how that service will actually be delivered is known at this point, but in terms of determination of those proposals or applications, that will definitely be done by a dedicated team and not by a permitting service.
I think it's E&B will continue to do that, Alan.
Yes, as has been the case with the appropriate legal support.
Sorry, E&B is the head office environment and business team, the people that are currently doing it, just for clarity.
There's a question here about additional requests for information. Will that flat fee for additional requests for information only be levied in the case of a formal Schedule 5 notice, or would that include requests by email? My understanding it is just for formal requests. Paul, is there any more detail on that? Yes,
obviously the mechanisms haven't been fully fixed yet, but we want it to be a process that everybody's comfortable with and that people understand what the likely charges will be up front. So with some of this work, that's important, that you just don't keep getting requests for information and accruing big bills. That's important to us.
Another one here, Paul, that I'm going to refer to you to see if you know the answer, because I don't. And the question is whether there will be an additional component charge for people discharging improvement conditions. Will they be subject to another charge at that time? I've not heard that mentioned.
Yeah, it's something that's being looked at, and you'll have to look in the consultation document. That would be in the subsistence fee in terms of time and materials. That's something to look out for. I'm not sure which side of the fence we came off with that, but I will be talking a little bit more about first year supplementary charges, and I will talk about subsistence fees for installations where these things are actually built into the annual subsistence fee as well. So we will pick that up a little bit later.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here about Opera and how Opera links to this, and will the changes affect Opera? Basically, in relation to charging, Opera is going to be abandoned. So we're using a much simpler model to allocate risk tiers for the activities. Okay, I think we've covered the majority of the questions raised. There's quite a few related ones here, and there's one or two complicated ones that I think we might need to get back to people afterwards concerning. But I think that's it for now, Claire. Thank you.
We will try and answer all of the questions offline.
Okay, so thank you very much for all your questions. Keep them coming. We will try and get through as many as we can at the end as well. And obviously we can pass all the questions on to Paul and Alan. But to say, please also state your thoughts actually within the consultation. So I'll hand back now to Paul to carry on with the presentation.
Thank you very much. This is and thank you very much for all of those questions, and it was nice to see some familiar names there as well, even though we didn't get to answer some of your questions. Hopefully we can pick some at the end. This is subsistence fees. This is the annual charge that you get for site inspections, etc. And we're going to sort of cover for this aspect now. Claire, do you want to change slide? Thanks, please. Thank you very much. I've just got a slight problem with my screen. That's sorted. Okay, so some of you will recognise this. It will probably strike the fear of God into you if you've seen it before and bring back memories from many, many years ago. But this is just to remind people where the current waste operations charging scheme came from, really. And we're talking Waste Management Licensing Fees and Charges Scheme 1994. And alongside that, we had things like Waste Management Paper 4, and then along came the Environment Agency's OPRA scheme, where we said how often we would visit sites, how often and how long it would take. But I thought it was important just to bring people back to that, really, to say, well, this is where it really started, and it hasn't changed significantly since then, though the waste industry has changed significantly, and the way we do regulation has changed significantly as well. So you'll recognise some of those things about visiting civic community sites 4 times a month, and it was going to take 1.5 hours, and people had assumed it was going to take half an hour out and back, or quarter of an hour between sites. They're fairly unrealistic figures, to be honest, and we'll talk about that in a couple more slides. But again, just to recognise, this is where it came from. There were various increases in the charging scheme throughout the years. However, rate of inflation type changes, but there haven't been any changes for a number of years. So this is why we've got to where we are. Thank you. Even more frightening than the 1994 scheme is the OPRA scheme. Those people that have had the pleasure of having to fill in an OPRA spreadsheet and calculate application charges. Hopefully you'll think that a new approach is easier. If it isn't, you must let us know. And that's where we had various points for different activities, in terms of, we had a complexity charge. If you had emissions to water, that would accrue things, emissions to air, emissions to land, sewer, off-site waste disposal. All those things added up in terms of points to give you a score, which then multiplied by the OPRA charge multipliers, which are on the bottom right of the scheme, gave you your application charge, subsistence charge, etc. And you can see things there. That was a very complicated approach with a lot of guidance, and it was quite time consuming. So we're hoping that this new approach that we have will be favoured, because it'll be a lot easier. Thank you. So we talked about the 1994 scheme and the baggage that brought with us. We have lots of baggage in the current charging scheme. We have things like references to new special waste. We have bizarre instances where standard rules cost more than bespoke permits for the same thing. We had to sort of look at the issues of EP-OPRA, residual waste management licenses, various charging rules. So we're hoping to get rid of a few of those. Some of them will have to stay, but hopefully make it a little bit easier. Thank you. So the things that we sort of built into the new proposals is things like fire prevention plans, looking at the current approach in terms of recovery versus disposal, the new plant issues, complexities, the fact that we have limits in permits at the moment, and working within those current limits so that permits didn't require variation. Problems with consolidated permits, what we called residual WMLs, where sites had a PPC permit all those years ago. We've reviewed mobile plant. We've also brought into this the T11 exemption review as well. In the charging scheme, you'll see that as well. And the complexity of looking at things like standard rules and fixed condition licenses. So we had all those things thrown into the mix to resolve. Thank you. So I think one of the questions was, those prices look a bit high. I think that was one of the questions, if I'm paraphrasing it. And this is our charge model, basically. And where we were with the 1994 scheme, effectively, was only charging for those activities in green on the left-hand side. Previous to that, we think that most of the costs were covered by grant in aid, and of course that's reduced over the years and reducing further. And now we need to see all of the costs associated with regulating a site being levied through the subsistence charge. So this is the model really that comes out with the numbers at the end of the process. So we look at the people that are doing the compliance work, how much they cost, how much time it takes to supervise them and manage them. The other costs there in terms of the cost of buildings, lawyers. A big thing for the waste sector, of course, is bad debt provision, because quite a few people don't pay, and we still need to pay staff. That's a problem. So we've built in these extra, some people call them fixed costs or indirect costs, and they all add together with the actual time taken to do the regulation. I myself would no doubt be part of that fixed cost as well, just to give that indication. And the point I would make is if people believe these charges are wrong, and I saw some questions saying that you know, people shouldn't have to pay for bits and pieces, or they shouldn't be charged for things like definition of waste. Well, the question you've got to ask yourself, and the point you've got to make as part of the consultation response, is who should pay? Where does the money come from? Either we get paid to do it, or it has to stop. And that's where we got to with the definition of waste services, that we had to more or less stop them because we weren't being funded to do them. Thank you. So the approach we tried to do, and we will obviously be subject to critique, is we tried to go for a very simple approach, so it was easy to understand, so people didn't spend a lot of time trying to work things out or calculate things. That was more efficient in that approach. We really wanted to fully cost compliance efforts, so we looked at the efforts that should be used to undertake compliance at sites. We recognise that the current permits have limits for charging, and that people will recognise those as the up to 5,000, 25,000, 75,000 tonne limits. And we thought there was no point in reinventing something or coming up with you know, multiplying the number of EWC codes by 100 or something like that. We stuck with what's there already to make it easier. We wanted the same approach across waste installations and waste operations, so people didn't have to go to 2 different charging schemes. They should be able to do things quite easily. We recognise that recovery operations and recycling operations don't take any less resource to do compliance on than disposal operations, and that was a hang up from the 1994 scheme, when there was a lot less recycling or recovery going on there. It takes perhaps even in some cases more effort from us due to things like complaints and build-ups of waste when the markets change. We concluded that standard rule sites don't take any less effort to do compliance than the equivalent bespoke permit. So we'll see, you will see we have aligned those charges there. We've got the opportunity to get rid of phrases like new special waste. I think some of you will be glad to see the back of them too. And we had to reflect these baseline admin and indirect costs and fixed costs, as I spoke about in the previous slide. And as part of this review, we realised that actually waste wasn't paying the right amount of money into the national incident management coffers, and a lot of the national incidents were waste-based, so we had to increase marginally some of those costs there as well. Thank you. So the approach we took was a generic approach of looking at resource, high, medium, low resources. We broke the sectors down into subsectors. The subsectors were then broken down into sort of similar type activities, and we called them subcategories. We looked at the size of sites. We looked at how often we thought we needed to inspect and audit them, whether we had desktop compliance assessment work that was required, so submissions that needed looking at. That all took time, reviewing waste returns and environmental monitoring returns, including things like pollution inventory and things like that as well. Thank you. So this is what the table looked like, and it will change. The version you will see in the consultation is different. This was pre-legal, where we tried to use very common descriptions. Unfortunately, when it came out of the legal process, it got a bit changed. Again, your views would be really good when the consultation starts. The figures you see down the right-hand side are indicative. They have changed since I put these slides together, so don't take them as gospel. Please look at the consultation itself. But for metal recycling, you'll see we've got the larger installations, the most resource-intensive activities at the top of the table. For display purposes at the bottom, we've got a Tier 11 exemption at the bottom there. It's got its own section in the consultation itself, so look out for that. There are effectively 5 different charge categories for metal recycling, and what we need to understand from you as part of this consultation, if you undertake activities in the metal recycling sector, can you see your activities there? Is it easy to work out what your charge might be? That's what we really need to understand. Have we got it right? Have we got the descriptions right? This is abbreviated for the purpose of presentation as well. So we do write things out in terms of end-of-life vehicles, metal recycling sites, in the final version. So those sort of questions are, is it clear to you? And then do you agree with the charges afterwards? Thank you. For non-hazardous and inert, again, we've got 5 bands, again with a more resource intensive at the top and the least resource intensive at the bottom, and picking on this one to illustrate the bottom of the table, you'll see that when we showed you the amount of effort required to regulate a civic amenity site in 1994, we've changed our views on that, and we really want to reduce that as part and parcel of SROC. So we've seen significant reductions towards the bottom of this table here. But again, we would ask the same questions. Do you recognise, do you understand this table? Is it clear? Could it be made clearer? If so, how? And then do you agree with the charges? Are they proportionate? Thank you. So we've skipped the hazardous waste and bio waste. You'll see the similar sort of approach in terms of the charging scheme. This was figures that we pulled together sort of very early on in the consultation process, and again, they are not particularly accurate, and it's important you recognise that. But what we wanted to illustrate was the sort of the big picture, really, and that we were seeking to increase charges at landfill sites, closed landfills as well, because we thought we were under recovering there, and we think they need more regulatory scrutiny. Metal recycling looks like we're proposing to increase the charges there. That's a lot of that is to do with the changes to the T11 exemption, so you have to bear that in mind. Bio-waste treatment, we recognised we were under recovering, and the other sectors were effectively subsidising the work that was done in the bio-waste treatment sector. Lots of issues with odour there that were quite resource intensive. As part of this review, we realised that we could reduce charges for hazardous waste treatment facilities because they required less regulatory effort due to the checks and balances that the sector generally have in place. And non-hazardous waste looks more or less the same, so round and about charges remaining the same. You will see changes within these tables, so some people's charges will go up and some will go down, but overall wanted to get across to people that it wasn't a blanket, we'll put everybody's charges up. It was a really focused look on what we needed to charge for and what we didn't. Thank you. So in addition to the charging tables, we did still have the issue of charging rules, and it's important you do look at those as well. Waste sites vary in complexity and the numbers of activities that are undertaken across them. Some will only do a couple, some will do a lot. And again, we wanted a proportionate charging scheme, so we didn't levy the same charges on everyone. So that the charging rules that you see in the current scheme are carried across. So if you're doing a waste operation activity in an installation, that's 2 charges. If you're doing things in different sectors, you'll accrue charges from those different sectors. If you're doing a landfill activity and a waste treatment activity that aren't necessarily related, that will be 2 charges. We're looking at the mothball site situation where you can, if you stop operations, you can get a reduction in subsistence for 2 years. Again, that's a question that will be consulted on. Again, as will the pre-construction activity. There is a proposal for a first year of operation charge, so anybody that gets a new permit gets an additional charge. I think that's about £680 or 630, I forget which, but it's that order of magnitude. And we were thinking about surcharges for new operators, but I don't think we're going forward with that in the consultation. Thank you. This is about waste treatment, but I thought we'd just touch on a little bit on landfill for those people that have an interest, in that you'll see the charges for operational hazardous waste landfills remain broadly the same, but the that it's recognised that the resource required for non-hazardous waste landfill is not too different from a hazardous waste landfill. So you'll see increases there to closer to the hazardous waste charge, and very much looking at the closed landfill charges to ensure that we've got proper monitoring being undertaken, and we can ensure that they don't pose a risk to the environment or the public. Thank you. So this is the last slide, I think, and it's about compliance. I think some people will recognise the current CCS scheme, and a lot of people will have heard about the Environment Agency's proposals for 4 performance bands with exemplar. Those things have been put on hold to allow them not to be confused with the current charging approach. So we're keeping the current approach to compliance with CCS, with non-compliance is equals a breach of permit, which equals points, and you add those points up to work out whether you're in bands A to F, and then the charge modifiers will remain the same. There's 1 or 2 tweaks that that's always worth being aware of. I think for standard rules permits, we said you couldn't have the 5% discount in the past, and we're looking to be able to apply that to be fairer in the future. Basically, I think one of the charges we may see is that if there are exceptional events in year incidents that will require additional resource in addition to the resources being provided by the subsistence charge, we will be using time and materials to get that funded, basically. Thank you. And again, the final slide is that you can use, there's a hyperlink there for sending emails through to the charging people. I would say at this point in time, it's probably worth hanging on until the charging consultation starts, and then providing some focused questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question for the audience. Thanks for all that information, Paul. So the new question is, do you prefer the new proposed approach to opera? Yes, yes, possibly, but need more info. No, or what new approach? Okay, so if you want to vote, so click your answer and press submit. And Paul and Alan, you're not allowed to vote. Sorry, guys.
I know what Alan would vote.
Okay, so we've got 82% voted already, so we'll just give another few seconds and then we'll see what the audience thinks. So I've got a sneaky peek at the answers already, so interesting. Okay, so let's have a look. And overwhelming 60% say yes, possibly, but need more info. 9% what new approach, 13% a definite no, and 19% a definite yes. Is there anything you guys want to add to that?
There's obviously a couple of cynics there. Again, I will re-emphasise, we really do value all of the opinions, whether they are, what new approach or no. It's important to get balance. Look carefully at the consultation when it happens, and give as much response as you possibly can. Thank you.
Okay, so back over to Alan for as many questions as we have time for.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. So just picking up from where we left off, sorry, I've gone a little bit too far there. There's been a few comments about opera, and clearly some people are more supportive of the existing opera scheme than others. So as Paul was saying, all we can do there is, if you do have strong feelings about that, is urge you to make those comments in your consultation responses. There were some questions around transition of the charging regime, so the existing into the new. So one question here says, how will existing opera waste-based charges be transferred or managed. In terms of subsistence, it will be just a complete switch from one to the other. Hopefully, April next year, charging will be based on the new scheme, and the old will go. I can see there might be a bit more of an issue with application charges, because obviously we'll have applications coming in up until that point, which will presumably be charged under the current regime. But again, I assume there will just be a switchover date when any application that's made after that date will be subject to the new scheme. There's a question here. I know you had a slide, Paul. I don't know if there's any more we can say. Why are operators paying for things like bad debt and direct no people costs and corporate services? And you made the point, there's a range of costs that have to be included within that, have to be paid for, and so there's elements of that go into the charging model. Is there any more that we can say on that?
Yeah, it gets back to the point I made. I think, you know, who do you think should pay for them if it isn't the operator? You know, how do you think they should be funded? Should it come from general tax? You know, they have to be paid for. We have to pay for people like HR. We have to pay for buildings. You know, how should it be funded if it's not paid for by subsistence? So, you know, you've got a view. That's good. But let's see how you think it should be taken forward if you don't agree with this approach.
Thanks, Paul. Another one here that's related to the transition. It says, will permit holders' first year of subsistence be calculated using the previous year's ops score? The answer to that is no, because we will be using the new model to calculate scores from that point. But presumably their performance over the previous year will be used to apply any relevant multiplier to the baseline charge. There's a question here about, will there be any agency workshops for operators to help them come to terms with new performance ratings and charging schemes? The answer is definitely no in relation to performance ratings, because as Paul has just set out, there's no change in that for the foreseeable future, although there's work ongoing on that. Paul, other than what we're doing now, I'm not aware that there's anything else planned at this stage in terms of workshops, industry workshops in the run-up to the new scheme being introduced. Is that something that's been talked about?
We'll carry on engaging with trade associations, so we'll continue to meet with trade associations to go through it with them. Where we have opportunities to talk about it at other fora, we will definitely do that. Your new charge, we'll tell you what your new charge is proposed to be, and we're doing that QA at the moment, so it's not as though you have to pick one. We will translate that for you. Obviously, we'd like you to have the ability to check that if you so wish, but we'll continue engaging through sector groups, trade associations, those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here about standard rules permits, basically saying that if standard rules permits are supposed to be for low risk activities, then why should they take the same amount of compliance time? It's important to compare like with like here, because some standard rules permits are available for activities which may not actually be that low risk. They certainly relate to significant volumes of waste. So we may have a metal recycling site, for example, that with a throughput of up to 75,000 tonnes per year. And what we're saying is it really makes very little difference to us in terms of our compliance effort if we're inspecting a site that, because of its location, i.e. not being in close proximity to water resources, to conservation sites and so on, can operate under standard rules, and one that maybe is quite close to one of those receptors and therefore has to apply for a bespoke permit. So that's really the point here. Not all standard rules permits are necessarily for activities which are inherently low risk, and in terms of checking that people are following the necessary procedures, site management plans, site infrastructure, and so on. Let's say it does take just as much effort from us to monitor a standard rules operation as a bespoke one. There's a question here about, will there be examples of activities that each charge relates to? I mean, the charging scheme, the table, Paul's shown some examples of what they're likely to look like, and I think the hope is that it will be quite clear under the descriptions there where you sit. So I'm not sure that there will be any additional examples. You got anything to add to that, Paul?
We're obviously working with our operations colleagues, the people you know as site inspectors or compliance officers. So if people have got issues that they can discuss them with their compliance officer, it's worth highlighting that, I guess.
Thank you. Question here that may have been asked before you come to the relevant slide, actually. It says, will subsistence fees be added for facilities with multiple operations? And like Paul said, there will be, if you've got installation activities and waste operations taking place on the same site, on the same permit, there will be an element of the charge, a component for each of those, but there will only be one for installation and one for waste operation, regardless of how many of those you have. That's the general rule, but there are one or two exceptions to that. Question here about SEPA and NRW. Is there anything similar coming for SEPA and NRW? I mean, I'm a little bit out of touch with this, but I know SEPA have been reviewing charges. Are NRW doing anything, Paul? Do you know?
I'm not. I think they're just doing minor changes to their scheme, and I think SEPA are consulting on changing their scheme as well. But they're not the same. We've not taken similar approaches though. That people have come up with their own different approaches. Thank you.
Question here about annual subsistence for closed landfills, and I wasn't concentrating when you had your slide up, so I was looking at questions. But will there be an increase in charge for closed landfills? I think the answer is yes, isn't it?
Yes, significant increase. Some of them only pay a few £100s a year, and that does not cover the effort that's required to ensure that they are, not polluting the environment. So yes.
There's a question here: will the agency plan for a peak of applications being submitted before the new charges come into effect? Again, I'm sure that is something that's been recognised as possible or likely, but I don't know specifically what's been said about that. Anything from you, Paul?
Not that I'll raise it with my MPS colleagues. I think it's an obvious one, but I don't think many people have a backlog of these applications ready to put in. I think they do occur on a fairly natural cycle. That's a top tip, isn't it? There's a top tip for you if you want to say.
Yeah.
But make sure it's a very good. Make sure it's a very good application and that it is duly made and doesn't require further submissions.
There's a question here about when the consultation comes. Actually, it's the waste crime consultation, not this consultation. So that's a completely separate consultation. My understanding, waste crime consultation is still due this side of Christmas, but I don't know that. Are you aware of anything more on that, Paul? Waste crime consultation?
I will know. We thought it would happen in November. Everything slips a bit, but we still think it will happen before Christmas. We have no crystal ball, but that's the message that was given from DEFRA quite a while ago, and we've no reason to think that that's not going to happen.
This links into previous question about application charges and so on. It says, if an application comes in before the end of March, will it be subject to the new additional charges after the 1st of April? So, I mean, presumably if it's duly made, before that date, as you were saying, Paul, then that charge, the existing charge, will stand. But I guess if there was subsequently Schedule 5s or anything, would those kick in at that point?
Yeah, I can't see why not.
No. Okay. Why is everything based on negative performance and not positive? Why are there no rewards, only charges? I mean, there are rewards, and for the band-aid performers, as Paul was saying, the current system will remain in place for the short term at least. So there is a reduction for the good performers, and obviously we would love it if it was the case that everybody was performing to a standard where they achieved that reduction.
And I guess it's important to make it clear, the charges that we were talking about today are for what we call expected performance. So that's not completely compliant, but forgetting to send in your waste returns and things like that. That's the charging table that we've spent time on today.
And the last one I've got here is about complexities of site settings. How will that be understood without Opera? Will it be part of the permanent application? Now, on the subsistence charge, there is the potential for an additional component charge for sites that are in a sensitive location, because it's recognised that they will then entail additional work in determining. But I don't know if any more thoughts have been given to how that will be determined or defined. Or is it? I think it just talks about sensitive location.
Yeah, it's the same approach that we've currently got. So it's the same approach we have in terms of groundwater protection zones and air quality management zones and things like that. That remains. What we did realise as part of the review of subsistence is that it didn't make a significant difference to the compliance effort that we would put in. So it was unfair to charge additional monies for something that didn't make a significant difference in terms of resource.
Okay, well that's it. Thank you very much for all of your questions. I've tried to answer the majority of them. Again, there are some on a common theme, so I've not gone through every one individually. And just say once more, there's some in there that really are opinions, and so please do express those opinions in the consultation response. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. Thank you very much for our speakers. So thanks to Paul and thanks to Alan. Very informative, but can I just stress the real numbers, the pounds, shillings and pence are going to be in the consultation, and that hopefully will be out soon. So if we could encourage everybody to put their responses in via the consultation, that would be absolutely fantastic. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for taking part. And don't forget, there'll be a brief survey, only about 5 simple questions as you leave the webinar. We really do appreciate your feedback, and it is very important to us. So thank you all very much. And you should be getting an email tomorrow with the recording, should you wish to just remind yourself on some of the answers to some of the questions. Thank you all very much.